Hi, patrons.
Hey, patrons. Surprise.
I'm almost in the exact same position I was at the end of the last full length video, which was before this one comes out by like a week and a half. All right, that's cool. Whatever. Nobody watches videos anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
it's fine.
all right, ready to do this?
Let's party.
Oh, sorry. By the way, patrons, this is a mini about following up on our musings and prognostications discussion. So,
Yes, we are.
okay, I'll count us down.
All right,
And
cool.
3, 2, 1, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do Mini. I'm your host, Abraham.
And I'm Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that people do and animals do, and then once a week on Mondays we release these short form discussions that are just a tiny quick dive into a thing. And this is actually kind of a unique mini because this is following up a full length episode, and I had some ideas that I forgot to put into that episode that weren't really enough for another episode, so we just extended them into a mini episode, and that's what I decided to do.
And that's how we got here today. That's how the
Yes.
podcast was born.
So, yes, indeed. So, if you're joining us for the first time, thank you. Welcome. Appreciate you being here. If you'd like to support us, you can pick up some merch from our merch store. Join us on Patreon, where you'll get access to behind the scenes content, early releases, and all kinds of good stuff over there. Also, on our full length episodes, I'll read your name as in the credits of that episode. And you can leave us a rating and review, like and subscribe, and of course, tell a friend. But let's go ahead and dive into our topic very quickly here, which is we recently released, I think at the time of this recording, like a week and a half ago or so, an episode on just sort of discussing our thoughts about the recent election in the United States and our predictions for the future, with what we know about what's happening currently and what's likely to rise in the next administration for however long that goes on. And I just had some more thoughts I wanted to extend out, and so this mini is essentially musings and prognostications about what happened and what's going to happen moving forward, but in a sort of little extension format.
Yes. And so we are there's a couple more topics that we wanted to touch on. It's possible that we may do more of these episodes to kind of like talk about current events to make sure we're staying up to that because there's just so much to unpack. We haven't talked about foreign policy and war and international trade and all those things. But today I know we're at least going to talk about two things, which is censorship and immigration.
Yes. Okay, so one of the things that occurred to me, and again, I had planned to discuss more in the original episode, is this idea of censorship. Because what's very likely to happen in the next administration is a lot of things are likely to go very sideways and turn out very poorly. But how would you know? Even things that affect a huge amount of people may not affect you or anyone in your inner circle directly. I mean, just look at COVID. There are people who believe that that wasn't real when there were like hospitals nearby who had to turn their parking garages into a makeshift morgue because there were so many bodies piling up. But because those people
Right.
didn't personally know someone who had died of COVID, they refused to believe it was the case. So it is not that difficult to remove yourself from a situation that doesn't directly affect you and then not have any information about the fact that that's going on, even though it's affecting hundreds of thousands or even millions of other people that are sort of just not in your orbit directly.
Right. And that happens, unfortunately, with a lot of different issues, right? Like it's not just COVID, it is things like IVF, it is things like human rights, it is things like access to education. It's you see that when you go, well, it's not my family, it's not my friends, and then people just leave it alone, and then they just cannot access information.
Um, Beep. Yeah, exactly. And so, with this idea of censorship, one of the things that's already happening is the Trump administration is completely stacking their cabinet with yes people, people who are only going to tell him what he wants to hear. And we saw a version of this play out during COVID when he was president last, where he said, we have to stop measuring it because that's why we're getting such big numbers is we're measuring it. I'm like, Measuring COVID does not cause COVID. That's stupid. But
Right.
what essentially what they were advocating is let's pretend it's not a problem. And if nobody knows how bad the problem is, we can pretend the problem's not that bad. And at the time, there were a lot of people in positions to push back on that and say, well, I'm just going to say the data are what the data are. And like, we're just going to say it. We're going to share what those information are. And there were places that underreported it and places that overreported it and places that appropriately reported it. But there was the pushback from the administration to just not have accurate data. And it's part of the censorship theme of the conservative movement in pretty much all places in the world, but definitely in the United States right now, that the idea is don't provide accurate information. So if our GDP shrinks, if our economy is collapsing, if unemployment skyrockets, we might not know if it doesn't affect us directly because the government might just say that's not happening. It's not real. And they just might
Right.
not report on it or they might lie or obfuscate. And like a lot of people will hear that and believe because they already are inclined to believe whatever this person says, they might hear that and believe, yeah, things are great. They've never been better. And with the government, like specifically Trump's disdain for reporters and the media holding politicians accountable, there is likely going to be a pretty significant push to decrease the journalists' ability to do their jobs, which means
Right.
that like even though independent media outlets could be reporting on what's actually happening out there, the government typically has not been able to censor that, and the government right now is gearing up to specifically censor that, so that the only news you get is news that is curated by the government to tell you what they want you to believe. And they're like putting people in place to make sure that that happens right now. So there is the likelihood that we won't even know how bad things get, and people may even believe that things are going well, even if they aren't, because of their tendency toward a huge amount of censorship by only putting people who are going to tell them what they want to hear and only going to report on things that make them look good. And part of the evidence for this is the fact that every dictatorship that has ever lived has done this. And like
Right.
it is endemic to conservative governments that they do this, that they lie, they obfuscate, they cheat, they steal, they portray information that is factually demonstrably wrong because it allows them to maintain control over the electorate. Look at Russia. This is like just how they operate. They just say like this things are fine. This is the story.
Right.
And the media outlets are not reported to, they're not allowed to report things that contradict the government's official statement about those things. So people in Russia won't even know what's happening in Russia because the government will make sure that they only get the information that the government control, and they can China does a version of this too. China and Russia will block access to internets from other countries so people can't even get news from outlets that are reporting about what's happening in their country. And so again, the only information they get is distilled to them by the government's bureau of people whose job it is to only feed them the information that they want them to have. And so I don't know how much of that's going to come to fruition, but some amount of it already is and is likely to continue on that trajectory.
Well, and to add to that, like that's kind of the I think the lower end of the problem that will happen. I think a larger part of this too is that censorship also occurs when an administration or a government makes enemies of people who are informants and people who are sharing
Yeah.
information and makes them enemies of the state, which ultimately is a scary thing because then can become enemies of the administration. They can be prosecuted for reporting out specific information, and that can turn into a slippery slope around the concerns that have to do with freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And so like there is a piece there where like people's lives could be really messed up and people get hurt, and people can die as a result of being made an enemy of the state.
Yeah. Soviet Russia did this. Obviously, we have Jamal Khashoggi as an example of how this has played out. North Korea rules with an iron fist over the media and consumption of information that people have access to. So, like, they part of the reason Trump is so obsessed with Kim Jong Un is his ability to completely control, dominate, and manipulate people's perception of what's going on in the country and the government. And
Right,
like people starve to death there, and nobody knows about it because the government won't report on it. And like they can just
right,
keep running. It's an unstable form of government, but it can last a lot longer than you'd think. Even though it's pretty much inevitable that it will fail at some point.
right.
All right. Well, on that downer note, let's insert a downer note in the form of ads.
Nice.
Okay, the last topic I wanted to come back around to also was immigration, because the whole theme of the campaign was this gigantic fear mongering scare tactic about immigration as the cause of all of our problems in the United States. How well that resonated for people, I don't know. But it kind of doesn't matter at this point because that was a huge campaign platform. And so that has become a focal point for what the new administration is gearing up to do. And there's essentially four things to talk about that are likely to happen here because they've been campaigning on this idea of mass deportation. Now, that is nearly impossible to pull off, really, if you think about how what would take place. But essentially, they'd have to identify who is being deported, they have to collect them somehow, and they have to get them on transport to deport them to wherever they're going. And so the first step is identifying the who. And this is a place at which precision is not something that is in their wheelhouse and is not even something they really care about, which is
Right,
to say, um, they the people they identify as being illegal immigrants might not be illegal immigrants. They could be asylum seekers. They could be people who are here with visas and green cards. They could be legal citizens, naturalized citizens of the United States. But the way that they're going to try and determine whether or not they're legal citizens is by looking at their skin color mostly and then asking, "Can I see your papers?" And if it just so happens you don't have them on you, you might end up in a detention camp. And again, they might not ask. They might just
right.
say, they might just see you and say like, "You look like you don't belong here. I'm going to detain you. I'll try and sort this out later, maybe if I get around to it." Well,
Right. And that's actually a significant problem because when that happens, then you've got situations that are reminiscent of early World War II. You've got internment camp concerns. I mean, and we can bring that up and we can draw the parallels specifically about those types of situations where you have got groups of people who are being profiled as a result of a specific rhetoric or language and stuff like that. And a lot of times people do point to things like internment camps, which we'll talk about detention camps in a second. But they that example of identifying somebody as other and creating that kind of enemy as a result of the language that this administration is using, now you're creating like this has happened with this happened after 9/11 with
yes,
anybody who could
absolutely.
be remotely considered Middle Eastern. All of a sudden, they were an enemy of the state. They were a suspect, and it became there was a huge increase in hate crimes as a result of that. So this is not just about dispelling myths around immigration. This is also about people's safety, and the rhetoric that's being used is very, very, very dangerous to people who could be identified as quote unquote as Mexican immigrants, and they may not even be from Mexico.
Very much so. Yes, exactly right. And what was something you said in there I wanted to address?
I brought up 9/11.
Oh, yes. Okay. Beep. Another example you mentioned the hate crimes following 9/11 was the hate crimes that increased among Asian Americans at the beginning of COVID. And so like people already do not do this with precision. This government does not necessarily do things of this nature with precision, and the incoming administration could not care less about precision in how this is implemented. So, like,
Right.
there are going to be people who are incorrectly put identified as flagged for deportation who are going to end up in these camps. They are going and will be deported, even though they are legal citizens here, that's going to happen. And maybe not often, but it will happen. There are going to be people who die in these camps. And so let's actually talk about the camps here. Is already the government of the state of Texas has already guaranteed the incoming administration that Texas will set aside a gigantic chunk of land to house detention camps for people they identify for deportation. And so, like, that means that they're going to be taking these people, putting them in these camps that are not super different from camps you might have found in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, and people are going to suffer there. They're going to have to feed them, bring them water, ensure that they've got access to some kind of toilets. And what's that going to look like by a group of people who don't care whether the people they have interned or live or die? It's going to look ugly. Is how that's going to look.
Right.
So they're going to be filling up these camps with people, some of them who don't belong there at all, and some of them who are not Mexican people who they have flagged to return to Mexico or return to Mexico, send to Mexico, I guess. And so that's a thing that's already happening. And the next part of this is, where are they getting those people? And because most people who come into the United States, however they choose to come here when they're immigrating, they come here for work. And
Right.
the people who come here who do so illegally, who tend to work jobs where they get paid under the table, they're working in sectors of our economy that are massively critical to our survival as a country. The vast majority of our park and forestry system is actually populated by immigrants, but they're not the place where you have as many illegal immigrants. Where you find a lot of them is in the farm sector and in agriculture, that they are out there working in those places. And I get that it is not an ideal system, that our economy depends on paying people below minimum wage, like a not living wage, to perform crazy difficult labor for long periods of time, and that's how our economy survives. I get that that is a massive problem that we need to fix. It is the current system. And if you pull all of that labor out of that system, what happens? That means the farms do not have enough workers to produce their product. That means they might have to hire a whole bunch of workers who don't want those jobs, by the way, pay them significantly more, which means that the cost of their overhead is way higher than they were, which means that if they can fill those jobs, if they can continue to produce their products at the rate they're producing them, they're going to have to charge a lot more. And if they're charging a lot more, then people are going to buy more imported goods, which are being taxed by tariffs, which means they're paying a higher tax on those goods. So
Right.
either way, the prices go up substantially. Like, they could go up way beyond what you thought was possible from the worst parts of inflation.
Right.
The alternative, though, is that those businesses just die. That those farms collapse because they cannot produce at a rate that they can sustain. And the other businesses that are not farms, that are also that are largely employing people who are here illegally, who just came for work, those businesses will lose a huge chunk of their workforce. That means they can no longer afford to stay open, which means they close, which means that everyone who was hired there, who is a natural born US citizen, also is out of a job. And that place is no longer participating in the economy, and neither are their employees, is a thing that research
Right.
has found also happens. And the people who are here for work, they have to buy groceries while they're here. They have to pay utilities while they're here. They have to, like, buy gas while they're here. They are participating in our economy. And so when you're trying to excise literally millions of people who are participating in our economy is going to take a pretty substantial chunk out of it, by the virtue of that workforce being gone. So
Right.
I just think that's one thing to prepare for. Is I think this is going to dramatically and drastically change the nature of businesses in our economy, and we're going to see prices go up probably pretty quickly and pretty aggressively, and we're going to see some businesses collapse, which will overall hurt, particularly some rural towns where there aren't very many people. That might be the end of some of those towns.
Yeah. I mean, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, when you start thinking about like balancing any sort of equation that has to do with money, you go, okay, removing a chunk of people who are spending money in an economy will already cause a deficit. Removing the people that are doing the work and replacing them with folks that are going to require a higher level of pay because of the way our system works is going to increase those goods on top of the imported goods. Like you've already got like you're basically like you are creating these deficits on both ends. It's burning the candle at both ends effectively,
Right.
right? It
It
is
is.
absolutely it is like pure destruction on both sides of this issue that it just doesn't make any sense for people who are trying to vote for lower prices. It literally is the antithesis of that.
Yes. Yeah. This will not work. To do like they will not be able to remove the people they think that they're removing. Not with any level of precision. They're going to remove people they shouldn't be removing. People are going to die. People are going to get hurt. The economy is going to take a huge gut punch to the stomach and maybe the jugular. And we'll see how that all shakes out. But those are very likely going to if it comes to pass that they act on this mass deportation thing, and they are working hard to make it come to pass. So it seems very likely that at least a version of it will. The outcome is not going to be what people think it is because crimes are not being committed by immigrants, they're being committed by people here. And when their economies start to decrease, crimes get worse. So like
Right.
we're going to see an increase in crime, an increase of prices, a decrease in the economy, and a bunch of people who we want here anyway will no longer be here.
Yep.
And so it is just it is something that I think people do not have a lot of critical thinking around the implications of this. And again, I get that the system isn't working super well. And I just want to have a quick aside. I know we're like way past our normal time length on this, but I want to have a quick aside of like people who constantly say, um, like I'm cool with immigrants. They're great as long as it's legal. What I have a problem with is illegal immigrants. Okay, fine. I get what your argument where you're coming from there. But in my mind, the next logical solution then is make it as easy as possible to become a legal immigrant. Like if that's your concern, then make it easy. But that's not actually the concern. The concern
Right.
is people who don't look like me are coming into this country. People who don't speak a language I speak are coming into this country. That's what their actual concern is. And so rather
Yeah.
than embracing the benefits of diversity that come with people who look different and speak a different language, they're choosing to shoot themselves in the foot by getting rid of that amazing group of people that we benefit from having them in our country to begin with. And ideally, we should just make it easier for them to come into this country and work or live or do whatever. If your concern is illegal immigration, then making it easier to do legal immigration should be the next logical step.
Well, and the concerns that people typically bring up about illegal immigration is totally untrue. They argue that illegal immigrants are burdening the healthcare system and that we have to pay
False.
for them. Well, which is all
False.
false, right? Like so none of that is true. The majority of the healthcare system that is being burdened is due to citizens, and also the healthcare system overcharging and
Yeah,
engaging in
that's a
predatory
whole
practices.
discussion.
So that's a system.
Yeah.
That's a whole different thing on its own. People will argue immigration and welfare issues. False. The majority of people who are on welfare or like any sort of like social program like that are U.S. citizens who are mostly white. So like you're gonna find that the people that they've demonized a group of people when the actual issue is really of their own creation. Like it's really it's the amount of cognitive dissonance that has to occur and the hurdles that have to be jumped to make those arguments is astounding to me.
And because we went so long, quick hurdle, another ad break.
Nice.
All right, well, we'll wrap this up really quick because we're so far over time. But you're exactly right, and that it's counterproductive. Like it's people who are accomplishing the opposite of what they accomplish because they're believing incorrect information that is demonstrably false. And there are people who will point out like we don't have enough housing to let that many people into the country right now, and they're kind of right. There is a shortage of housing, but the solution to that is build and sell more houses. And I guarantee you, people who are developers who are like real estate moguls, they have no problem with that as a solution. They are very happy to build and sell more houses and
Well,
apartments.
Yeah, and you can repurpose abandoned buildings. There are plenty of abandoned buildings that can be broken up into small apartments that can be used for like transitionary periods, like or student housing. There's a lot of like if you go to Jacksonville, Florida, and you go to downtown, like there are so many abandoned warehouses and buildings that if you spent a little bit of money bringing it up to code, you can make it set. And they actually did this project in Jacksonville where they actually took unhoused people, they got them into this these buildings, and the workforce increased, the amount of arrests decreased in the area, the amount of drug charges decreased. Like it's there are solutions to these things that are creative solutions that people just don't want to see. It
Yeah,
does
that's
exist though, and
awesome.
it's yeah, it was really great. The data were really promising, and it was a really cool pilot program. But ultimately, the problem is people don't they see a price tag and they don't want to deal with that.
You know what? This has been long enough that maybe we'll split this into 2 episodes. So I'll work with Justin to figure out how that takes place.
Yeah,
That is essentially what we wanted to say about this. Like we got more down the sort of rabbit hole on immigration than I thought that we would. But I think we discussed immigration on here, and people continue to bring this up as an issue. And like part of the our reason only exists because of immigration. That's the only reason it exists. For better or for worse, there are a lot of problems that came with the immigration that happened where we were like, let's move a good chunk of Europe in here and then have all the babies and kick out all the
right,
people who lived here before us. Like obviously huge amounts of problems, but like our country is has the highest GDP in the world by like a comically large margin.
right,
And part of that has to do with the fact that we have a lot of people here and a lot of immigrants choose to come here. And being a place that is a popular place for people to come makes it a good, strong economy. So kicking people out is the opposite of trending in the direction toward a good, strong economy. So for those of you like those of you who like the people out there who don't have this information, they're not listening to us. So again, this is mostly to arm our very smart listeners with information that can go out and share with others. Because I realize that a lot of times I feel like I'm talking to you and you're not the problem. You found your way to a podcast to learn more things. So like you guys are already on probably the people doing the right thing. So maybe this is you can share this podcast or just share the information with the people who need to hear it. But I feel like I just wanted to get these talking points out there because there's just so much drastic misinformation.
yeah, absolutely, 100%.
All right. Well, that went long. Although maybe it's short, depending on whether we split this into two minis, which would be very strange, but probably a thing we're
Yes.
gonna do. So I think we'll end it there. If you would like to tell us about, if you'd like to reach out to us about anything we talked about here today or in any of our discussions, you can email us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com. Join us on social media platforms and over on Patreon. Leave us a rating and review, like and subscribe, tell a friend, all those things. And I think that is all I have to say. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I forgot before we wrap this one up, Shane?
I got nothing on my end.
All right, then this is Abraham.
This is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
Ooh. If we do split that up, it would be like two 14-minute episodes, which is ironic because it's nearly the length of a fucking episode now. Um,
Right.
and doing a two-part minis almost doesn't make sense, but I wonder if we could split it up in terms of censorship and then another one in terms of immigration. And if we do
Yeah.
that, we'll need a second intro and a second outro.
Okay. Well, just let me know what we do. Because I won't have time to record a bunch of like any of the extra stuff today. So let me know what you
Okay.
want to do, and then we can plan to do that next week, maybe.
Yeah, I think I'll just let Justin know what happened and then we'll just make a plan moving forward.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you so much for your time. Oh, bye, patrons.
Bye, y'all.